Hi, I'm Kamlesh Ravlani with a Scrum trainer and a coach with Agile for Growth. Today with us we have Daniel Gullo, who's a certified Scrum trainer and a certified enterprise coach with Scrum Alliance. Daniel is also an author of an upcoming book. We'll talk about that pretty soon. So welcome Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Excited, yeah. So Daniel, you facilitate a lot of Scrum trainings, internal, corporate, as well as public. So could you please tell us your idea of what makes an effective Scrum Master?
Sure. So in my classes, we talk a great deal about not only the elements of Scrum and what the actual responsibilities are per Scrum for a Scrum Master, but also the characteristics of a good Scrum Master. So things like being a people person and practicing things like appreciative inquiry and taking really a genuine interest in other people, as well as some tips and tricks for how to facilitate meetings and conversations and really how to be a coach for a single team, because essentially that's the scope of practice for a Scrum Master, is to be a coach for the Scrum team. So there's other things too, like sort of having a counseling mindset. So dealing with people's problems. So oftentimes we think that we can separate our lives, compartmentalize our lives. This is my personal life. This is my business life, and so on. And we all know that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
We have to have work-life integration, really. And so helping people to figure out how to marry or integrate their personal life and work life. And also, everyone is on a certain path. As Daniel Pink says in his book Drive, most people are trying to pursue their mastery. And so finding the nexus point between, this is where a person's trying to go in their personal career and path and so forth, and this is what the company needs. And finding the win-win situation is another thing that a good Scrum Master might do. So
wonderful. I heard a theme of personal development and being a people person in your response about what makes an effective Scrum Master. So, a lot of time we see organizations when they're looking for Scrum Master, they look for a lot of technical or project management experience or tools or skills, and they say you should have this certificate, that certificate, you should be able to do testing or maybe write a code and do the Scrum Master.
Sure.
But whereas in your team, it's more about being a people person. So could you please, have you seen this trend, and what are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, another key element of all of this, a source of why there is a Scrum Master to begin with is, historically there's been a problem between the business and IT, right? The business represented by the product owner. Well, basically it represents economics 101, right? Unlimited wants and limited means. So we have the product owner representing the business and the customer, and they're asking for this and that and everything else. And then oftentimes the IT side is saying we can't do this, we can't do that. For IT, it seems like nothing's ever possible, right? So having a Scrum Master really completes the picture, and they act as sort of a like I said, a coach already, but also a mediator. When there's issues that arise, which frequently happens, especially when teams are brand new, where the product owner is having maybe unrealistic expectations or demands, and the team is maybe reluctant or hesitant because they aren't really sure of their capabilities,
Sure.
and so on. The Scrum Master would be there to help move the conversation along and make sure they're not getting hung up on those types of things. A lot of times I use the analogy of the Scrum Master is kind of like the oil in the machine. but they're not the actual machine. So a key point of this too is that Scrum Masters really need to be, it is an independent role on the Scrum team. So because they're acting in a sort of a neutral, objective third-party type capacity, it's a system, right? The Scrum team is a system, and the system won't function if the Scrum Master is somebody who's on the development team, or is somebody who's fulfilling both the roles of product owner and Scrum Master. So in order for them to truly be independent and objective, it really needs to be a separate person.
Yeah, and super focused on that job.
Absolutely, yeah. So also, having technical expertise and abilities is a bonus add, right? And they do have to have a certain level of technological expertise so that they can understand, when the team is talking about challenges and when they bring up impediments, for instance, they need to be able to understand how to shepherd those impediments along and bring them to successful resolution. But they also have to be they also have to be well versed in the business side, or understand enough of the business so that they can sort of bridge the gap between business and IT. Oftentimes, the product owner will say blah 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 blah, right? And then the Scrum team's like, what?
Yeah.
We don't understand what he just said.
Sure.
So they're kind of translating the business talk into technical speak and vice versa.
Yeah.
So kind of bridging the gap there.
Cool. So you have been a tech person yourself and been a Scrum Master, and you talked about helping the team resolve the impediments. Could you share some of your experience with that?
So another characteristic of the Scrum Master is basically it's not like when you become a Scrum Master, somebody waves this magic wand and says, now suddenly you have all this power.
Yeah.
Right? Scrum Masters have power, I'll say, by virtue of the fact that they have influence, right? And so influence is all about relationships, right? Building relationships with people, understanding their motivations and where they're coming from, and articulating things in the sense of sort of what's in it for them, what's the value proposition of what you're asking for, and so on. Because getting to know people and understanding where they're coming from and so on is probably one of the first steps to finding common ground and seeing how they can help you and so on. So I oftentimes joke around that if you're a Scrum Master and you know that the head of the ops group is a football fan, then you might want to learn about football.
Catch up on that.
Say,
Yeah.
hey, did you catch that Eagles game or whatever? And by the way, my team needs a server, right, or something like that. I'm not saying you should manipulate people, right? But resonating with them and striking up a relationship is always going to help.
One of our team, I was a Scrum Master, and we had a fantasy football group created for our team. And even after the product is over, the team moved on, kind of new assignments or new roles. I started my own, but we still have that fantasy football group, and each season we still play that.
Okay.
So that is what you're saying is that helping through a way to connect with people helps us to get the things done much easier and smoother way.
Sure, and I mean it enriches the workplace, right? I mean, a lot of times organizations and so on have become so clinical and so sanitized and PC, right?
Yeah.
You can't have an opinion, you can't joke around, you can't do anything a lot of times because there's this fear that you're going to upset somebody and then HR get involved and that kind of thing. So what I like to say, or the way I like to put it is Richard Lawrence has this saying called rehumanizing work, right?
Yes.
Bringing the human element back into the workplace, because ultimately we're all people, right?
Yeah. And we think that Scrum Master can play that critical role in helping people connect with people.
Absolutely.
At human level.
Right, yeah. I mean, because with a Scrum Master, again, from the coaching perspective, you don't have say football teams or cricket teams or any teams in the world that are coaching themselves.
Sure.
No matter how skilled the players are, no matter how well they know the game, all teams have external coaches because they're so busy playing the game and so hyper focused on what they're doing that it's difficult to get that perspective of what's going on across the entire game. So similar case, it's a similar case with Scrum teams that they kind of need somebody who's outside of the, outside looking in, that they don't have deliverables necessarily for the product, and they're not so close to the problem that they can't see the problem, right?
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Wonderful.
Sure.
Do you have any parting thoughts that any of the people who are certified Scrum Masters have been working in the industry as a Scrum Master for about 3 to 5 years, some specific actionables they can implement and even take their level to the next one?
Sure. So oftentimes, as you mentioned, I do quite a bit of public training and
Yes.
private training and coaching and so on. Oftentimes, what I find is the case when I do, for instance, a public class,
Yes.
is somebody will come to the class and say, "Oh, I've been doing Scrum for 5 years,"
Mhm.
and then by the end of the class, they're like, "Wow, we haven't been doing Scrum at all." So there is value in certification because it kind of level sets understanding of Scrum and Agile as well. Understanding all of Agile and then how Scrum relates to Agile and how actually Scrum influenced Agile because Scrum was around before
Yep.
Agile ever came around. But really, not letting that the certification is valuable, but don't let that be the end of your learning journey, right?
Sure.
So oftentimes when I teach classes, I give my students all kinds of different articles. We cover a lot of those in class. When they leave the class, they have a workbook.
Yep.
And in the workbook are all sorts of different resources for them to follow up on. Like I give them an entire bibliography
Yep.
of Agile books that I've drawn upon to build the workbook and materials that we've covered in class. And I think it's excellent that the Scrum Alliance has made it a requirement that people get SEUs
Yeah.
because it kind of incentivizes them a little bit to continue on. They don't just take a class and then they never touch a book ever
Sure.
again.
Yep.
Or don't go to a local meetup group and those kinds of things. So I think it's critical and crucial for anyone who wants to be a great Scrum Master to constantly be learning, constantly be looking for what's going on out in the community. So
Cool. Any specific advice you could give for people working as Scrum Masters?
Yeah, I think pretty much I've covered most of it. Yeah. Mostly don't trample on the team, I guess. Don't empower the team, help to make the team more and more self-sufficient, and don't be a prescriptive, don't be a prescriptive leader. Really, being a Scrum Master should be, and a lot of what coaching is about is guiding, suggesting. A lot of times, if people don't know that there's an option, how can they choose that as an option? So, helping them to discover what the options are and when there is a decision to be made and that kind of thing will help them to make wise choices. Better choices. Yeah. And then if they make a poor choice or it's not, they choose something and don't get what they expected, then finding the teaching moment and the learning moment from that, and so that doesn't happen again, right?
Yeah.
So.
Good. I have taken a lot of professional coaching sessions and trainings, and that have helped me as a Scrum Master, as an Agile coach a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think drawing from the professional coaching field into our teamwork that we do, that is a great benefit. Any Scrum Master can benefit from.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. So you have a book coming up. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah. So I wrote a book.
Yeah.
It's called Real World Agility.
Cool.
It's based on my research over the last 3 years for my CSM and CSPO and other workshops that I've run, I've played this little game called 35, and the game can be used for many different things. I've used it to gather questions. So I've asked my the folks in my workshops, what's one burning question in your mind? What's the most important question to you? If I could answer anything for you right now, what would that be, right? Yep. And write that on the card.
Yep.
And so I've accumulated a spreadsheet full of about 2,500 questions over the last 3 years.
Are you sharing with us?
No.
Love to get it.
Sure. But I've sort of looked through that and done some analysis and so on, and I came up with the top reoccurring questions and so on. And it's because even in spite of all the books that are out there, and in spite of classes and people's experience and so on, they still have questions.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I set about answering the top 50, 60 questions, and just spending about 3 or 4 pages and sharing my experiences and so on from the last 10 years that I've been practicing Agile, and putting it into a book format. So there's a lot of that. There's about 10 or 12 different people from the community who I asked at various different levels to give their testimony.
Uh-huh.
So I said, tell us your Agile journey, right?
Yeah.
Write 3 or so pages of, how did you learn about Agile? What were some challenges you faced along the way? And so on, and how has it been going for you? So
Sure.
I wanted, and I especially said it's critical not just to tell about the good things, but also the failures and so
Sure.
on. Because oftentimes people hear about Agile, and they think it's like a rosy picture,
Exactly.
right? Everything's going to be perfect.
Silver bullet to all our problems.
Exactly. So I wanted people to understand that there are going to be challenges, and it's going to be a little bit difficult and disruptive to their organization. But what they're gaining is visibility and transparency.
Yeah.
So in addition to all of that, I also wanted there to be a very healthy, sort of meaty glossary of terms.
Ah,
So there's a big section in there with, just my quick definitions for terms. Yeah, and there's, I don't know, close to 200 different terms related to Agile that are in there. Because oftentimes I was asked, do you have a glossary? Where can I find that? I'm like, well, it doesn't exist. Right?
Let me write it down.
Yeah, right. So real world agility, it's a practical guide for Agile practitioners is coming out. I just call it real world agility.
Yeah.
And the reason I titled it that was because oftentimes I would tell people, here's Scrum, and here's the way we should be doing things according to what Ken and Jeff have laid down in the Scrum Guide and so on. And their response is, well, I live in the real world. That would never work at my organization. I'm like, well, hey, I live in the real world too. And from my experience, I can tell you that if you follow it, then you'll get results, right?
Sure.
You'll have increased transparency, and that will help you to inspect and adapt. If you don't follow it, then there's no guarantees of what you'll get, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you have some kind of bastardized framework, who knows what you're going to get, right?
Yes.
It's like if you go in the kitchen and just start throwing ingredients in the pot. Garlic's great, chocolate sauce is great, maybe chocolate sauce and garlic not
They
so
don't
great.
go together.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Well, excited about it and looking forward to get a copy of it.
Sure. Yeah. Also, I wanted to share that Stephen Forte and I have launched a podcast, which is called Agile Next. Agile Next, yes. And the premise of the show is to have industry leaders from all over the place, from Lean Startup and Scrum and Safe and all over. So we're playing completely objective hosts and trying to get different perspectives from the larger community in the world, and really asking people, what's led you up to this what's led you up to this present point, and also, I mean, the biggest question is, where's Agile heading next, right? What does the future hold for Agile, right? So that show really is looking at the future of Agile and getting some experts to provide their opinion and guidance on it. So,
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel, for joining us.
Thank you.
Wonderful
It was
talking.
a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.